Best practices for ongoing training. First, communication is key, whether intentional or unintentional, verbal, nonverbal. The way you communicate with your team and the way they communicate then with your customers has a huge impact on your success now, in the midterm, in the long term. Hey, everybody, welcome to Best Practices. I'm joined today by Kayla Ashlee, who is the founder and CEO of Spexy.
Hello, Steve. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for agreeing to participate in Best Practices. Tell me a little bit about your journey in eye care.
My journey in eye care, I like it. When I started out in eye care, it was 18 years ago, and I learned very quickly that the optometric field, eye doctors and opticians alike, are really great. We're taught our trade, really refined, and being able to help the patient in all these different ways. However, I was able to identify rather quickly that not anyone is really ever taught how to properly run a business, nor run a team, nor be able to really have resources on how to make the best opportunity for having a retail environment out in their optical. And so that's when my business mind started really running. I came up with some solutions, and with those solutions, I presented them to the optical world, and I was like, okay, guys, isn't this great? And my super nerd math brain was like, yes, this is going to be awesome. Everyone's going to be blown away by how great this is. But the reality, nobody's ever been taught how to use these bits of data to make educated decisions within their office. And so then I was like, okay, well, I need to start training people. And that's when I found out I have a knack for training. So I was doing all my training and then I basically ended up putting it onto an online platform. Because what I realized is it didn't matter if it was a very small practice or a very large practice, they all needed the same help, which was amazing to me. And so I was like, okay, why am I going around to each and every single one of these offices individually when I can take all my trainings and put it in an online platform? And so that's when we created what is now Spexy. And Spexy is basically like Netflix for optical learning. So
Nice.
Just like with Netflix, how you would go out and watch a comedy, you would go on to Spexy and watch a new hire training. Just like on Netflix, when you would watch a horror film, you could go and do a training on managed vision care. You can go on, we have a whole library of different courses. They're all video trainings and numerous series about being able to really optimize your optical with patient care, but then also able to make the better decisions as far as opportunities in the optical, better opportunities for sales training that your team has never had before. That was my journey in a nutshell.
So I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this is I've looked at the training that you provide and think it's both fantastic and extremely necessary. Thank you for putting all that stuff together. Anybody listening to this might think instinctively, well, I know my team needs training, but I think there's difficulty in a practice owner or an optical manager, and no matter what scale you're talking about, in deciding on what to train and when,
Mhm.
and setting an ongoing plan for that. So I'd like to get your take on what are best practices for ongoing development, ongoing training, because I think there's a risk where a lot of practices will hire somebody and have them shadow whatever role they're about to do. So if you hire an optician, they shadow the optician for some indeterminate period of time. And then at some point, that shadowing stops and you hope that they're trained. And that's kind of it. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's not the best way forward.
We are in a very predecessor influenced industry, right? Where we're taught by our predecessor. And even if we have the best trainer that is there, the reality is our people who are training us in the office, they're contributing part of the team. So let's say that we have, a team of 5 people that we should have, and we're short a person, or maybe we're growing. And so we're going to bring on a fifth one. Well, what ends up happening is that we finally find someone to bring on. And so what do? We take the best person on our team who's great at training, and we go about putting them in charge of training this new hire. Well, this leaves the rest of the practice basically running under 3 other people, which is fine for a minute, but eventually something's going to break. And the strain that we end up
Right.
coming down to is that the rest of the team has so much pressure and strain put on their everyday roles that the leader needs to come back basically to be a contributing part of the team again, therefore not giving this person a lot of training, right? So, but the alternative is that the trainer leaves all their attention to this new hire, and it could be already an established optician, well trained in the trade, but they don't know how things work in their office. And so there's still the strain that's being put on them, right? And so what happens is that the rest of the team will end up getting burnout, which is a bummer because then we're in the same hiring stinking process again.
Right.
Or the leader ends up having to go back basically to the sales floor, kind of leaving this new hire out in this kind of like push them off the boat, sink or swim, let's see what happens kind of scenario. And so, because of this kind of like predecessor training, even with the very best trainer, so many times without any sort of foundational planning or framework, we end up forgetting things or we end up not knowing things. And what's really interesting is the very first training course that we came up with is called the Spexy 101 course. And the idea was that we could take someone from having absolutely no training at all to being a functional part of the team by the time they're done with the course. And the idea is that as they start going through the course, they can start helping out so that the rest of the team isn't put on that strain. And so we've figured out a pretty ideal way to go about training new hires to get them to that level of being a functional part of the team. And what's really interesting is it was originally created for new hires or for people who knew very little about what was going on in the optical. And in all reality, we have tenured opticians all the time that reach out to us that are like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for 15 years or I've been doing this for 20 years and I had no idea. That is why we did that. I just did it because I was told to. Right. But they had no real
Right.
reality. And so, we'll talk a little bit more about continuing that training, but just for the foundational people coming in, what's interesting is it's not just people coming in that need that foundational training. We're in an industry of predecessors, and if their predecessor forgot to tell us, we just might not know. you know?
Yeah, you touched on a couple of really important things, and I'm going to start backwards. First, the Spexy 101 training that takes a new hire from no experience to being able to function as a team member and useful as a refresher. How long does it take for somebody, if they're committed to running through, how long does it take from the first lesson to the last one? And then following on to your example, if you've got your best trainer or your best employee training somebody, how long does that take? And what's the difference between those commitments for a practice?
Yeah, so great question. So if you were to Netflix style binge watch it, which I don't recommend, it would be about 5 hours. What we do recommend is within the courses, because they're taught by yours truly, within the courses, I will go over the details or the bits of pieces that we're learning and training on. I'll show examples and then I'll say, okay, now go to your team leader and I want you to watch and observe them do this. And then I want you to try and do it with them. So it's meant to be personally paced as to how you are doing within the training. We usually recommend for most people, it's about 3 or 4 weeks to go through it. And the idea is that with the first section is pretty foundational, like understanding your scheduler, how typical appointments are made. But I don't know how every office does it differently. And so, what we encourage
Right.
offices to do is okay, so in your office, is it called a medical visit? Is it called an office call? Let's figure out what it's called. And then let's figure out how you guys schedule it in your system. Are you on, every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes for visual fields? How do you do that? So, we kind of go through all of it and break it all down, right? So your new hire is learning how to be able to read a prescription on the contact lens boxes. So now they can start checking in those orders, right? And being able to help out with some of those tasks. Fast forward to being able to have the opportunity of having like someone be able to check in orders, not necessarily do lensometry as far as glasses orders, but be
Right.
able to take a quick look over the glasses to see their quality and everything else. So the thing is, it's paced, but the idea is that again, they're still contributing as they're learning. And so the ideal is usually about 3 weeks. Sometimes it's 5 weeks for some people. But
Mhm.
what we have gotten in feedback is that's really beneficial is that the leadership likes it because they're like, okay, they came to me already knowing what Abbey value was. They came to me because they already saw all the descriptors, or they came to me knowing, this is how we utilize the lensometer. This is how we, calibrate it. This is how we they're like, this is awesome. I didn't have to teach them that. So they're over there learning it on their own. So it helps to take that, not the total responsibility, but it takes a lot of the seemingly unnecessary work off of that leader to be able to have us train them on that. And then their leader can go customize it for what's unique for their office.
Yeah, the logic is super sound because as they watch a Netflix episode, watch a Spexy episode, they get information and then they can go out on the floor and either ask their trainer or other team member for clarification or see it in practice and
Right.
then reinforce the stuff that they've learned. So if that process takes 3 to 4 to 5 weeks with a lot more passive time for the trainer, right, where
Mhm.
they get to just continue doing their job instead of having to focus all of their effort on the training. By contrast, what does it look like when somebody is responsible for 100% of the training of a new employee? How much time does that take?
Well, that's what's really funny is because it's really hard for people to quantify it because it has no logic, reason, or plan. So, therefore, when you have someone that you're like, okay, so you're going to follow me around for these next few weeks, and so this is how we do this, and this is how we do this. Oh, and here's this patient. Oh, and here's a drilled rim list. Let me show you how we do a drilled rim list. It's just so all over the place. It's really hard for anyone to learn in that environment. Unfortunately, it's been the only practices of how, as far as the resource that opticians or any sort of optical team had at their disposal, is to be able to go, okay, follow me around. And then here we come 3, 4, 5 weeks later, doctor comes down like, hey, why are we still doing this? Why is she making these errors? Well, I don't know. I talked to her about, when we build this vision plan, this is what we do. And I talked to her about, yeah, but did you? Did you though? And so, one of the other really great things, we have these optical workbooks that offices can purchase, and every page corresponds with what is being learned in the courses. And this has proven to be very beneficial where office managers will come back and they'll say, yeah, so we were doing that. I was talking to them about verifying insurance coverage, and then they opened up this insurance coverage thing. And they're like, what? And they're like, I didn't even know, this is really cool that we have this. Or, talking about pre-testing, like what are big questions that the doctor wants asked during pre-testing. So it's been proven to be really beneficial to have people following along with it. The leadership can also be following along, like, okay, let's see where you're at right now. It's really been
Mhm.
great because it allows for people a reference to be able to come back. Because if you're taking notes, even the best note taker, good luck trying to find those notes when you need them. Right? Just like your
Yeah,
training was.
I've done several of these best practice recordings at this point, and I'm starting to recognize a pattern. Everybody I've spoken with is talking about consistency, writing things down, quality of communication, and building something that's repeatable. And something that I've certainly experienced is the way that a lot of what we do in the industry is reactive rather than proactive.
Yes.
So if you're having somebody, you're training a new optician, you're having them follow you around. I think you made a really important point, and I just want to reiterate it. If I'm training you, Kayla, I'm an active optician and a patient comes in and I need to fix a drill mount, I got to stop training and fix that drill mount.
Yeah.
Or if there's a troubleshooting that needs to be done, I've got to go in and troubleshoot. And I'm not going to stop explaining the troubleshooting to the patient and explain it to who I'm training because the patient's probably upset. So I can't risk that. And then I maybe don't go back and devote the time to re explain every single thing I said. And some of that potential training got lost because the new hire didn't have the foundations to understand what was happening. And then repeat that for the entire purpose of training. Everything gets a little muddy.
Yes. Well, and on top of that, even if they did take it all in, even if they were taking great notes as to why this patient was having a problem and what was being troubleshooted and everything else, good luck having time for them to go back and go, okay, so tell me about Bob. Good luck going back and finding that because by the time you have a second, there's another patient there because we all know with new hires, we don't lessen our patient schedule. No, we
Right.
don't do that. We're making
Right.
money.
Gotta.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I think onboarding is something that needs more focus and doesn't get it. And I think in large part because we as professionals, as opticians, as eye care professionals, we're not really taught how to run a business. We're not really given
That's right.
a guideline of like, this is the best practice for this situation. I think what you said at the beginning, we are a heavily predecessor influenced industry. And I think that crystallizes a lot of the issues that practices are facing, even if they don't understand that that's the reason why. Something that I rail against whenever I'm lecturing is you'll often hear myself saying something like, because we've always done it this way is the worst reason to do something.
Oh my,
Right? Like,
yeah,
that's not to say that just because you've done it in the past means you should change it. Sometimes the way you've always done it is the right way to do it, but repeat it for that reason. Repeat it because it's right. Don't repeat it because it's how it's always been done.
that's right.
That's silly.
Yes, yes, exactly. And what's really interesting is in the optometric field, we can be messing it up, jacking it up in every way, not doing it in the most efficient, most refined, most anything else, and be making a good amount of money. And that's what absolutely boggles my mind. They say the enemy of great is not bad, the enemy of great is good, right? Because we're good enough and we get stuck at being good. And it doesn't ever push us to become great because we kind of get stuck in this rut of it's good enough. It's fine. It's the way we've always done it. It's
Yeah.
totally, but not realizing the opportunities when you're able to just go up a little bit, how much more successful it'll make you, how much more convenient it is for patients, how much more convenient it is for your team, how much more convenient it is for training, right? There's so many different dynamics where we kind of get stuck in good because it's the way it's always been done.
Right. Right. So that feeds directly into the best practices for ongoing training. Let's say we've got a tenured staff and we're not in a place where we need to hire, but should we do any training? When is the right time? How do we identify what we should be training on? There are some KPIs that most practices know they should be tracking, like capture rate, average ticket, multiple pair sales, or sunglass sales. Those are easy to measure sometimes if you've got good software that'll help you do that. But how do you know when something is working or not? And how do you know when to allocate your training resources to it?
Great question. When we're talking about, those KPIs that we run with our, increase our turn or increase our capture rate, when we're talking about inventory, increase our turn rate, when we're talking about these numbers, it's really interesting because the resources in our industry are often going to CE events, which I'm all about. I'm a CE speaker, y'all. Go to CE events, love
Me
them.
too.
I'm all about it. The reality is often at CE events, you will go to an event and you will have the pharmaceutical trainings, but you'll have some of the office managerial type trainings, and they will preach to you capture rate, capture rate, capture rate. Or maybe we'll go to some of our industry partner events and capture rate. Everything's about capture rate, which is great. But how the heck do we get there? And that's what absolutely boggles my mind is how many people in our industry are found to be very, oh, this talk was so great. Went there and we talked about capture rate and ways that we can increase the capture rate. And I'm like, okay, tell me how you're going to do it. Well, so we're going to talk to the team and we're really going to focus on multiple pair and capture rate. Oh my gosh, that's like, I went very give me step
Yeah.
one. And that's the hard thing is in our industry, we have some of these resources that are great. I'm not saying don't go to them. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying we need to be able to drill down these concepts of yes, capture rate is fabulous and we need to be monitoring it. But what are the things, not just down here, not just we're going to get multiple pair sales. Tell me how we're going to get those multiple pair sales. Tell me
Right.
what each person on the team is going to be doing to get those multiple pair sales. I believe people look for in the industry furthering their education, furthering their training, and things like that. I personally love to take the avenue of, okay, let's talk about these little things that we can be fixing. And then look, it's going to help increase your capture rate. Watch it. Watch, we're going to get your multiple pair sales up. We're going to be able to increase these things because we're doing these little tiny things rather than these big concepts because it's rather hard if you don't know what's going on in a lot of offices. We've got over 1,800 users now, which is pretty rad. Not gonna lie, really excited about it. So,
Amazing.
so what we have is we have the capability to see what's working in offices and see what's not. We can see what trainings they've done. We can talk with them and figure out what's being implemented, the results, and how things are improving. And that's what's really beautiful is because we can take these little tiny things down here that are making the difference up top. And so back to kind of your original question, when it comes to, what is kind of that continuing training, continuing education look like? Yes, go to events, get some CEs, get exposure, because that's one thing that'll help you to kind of like get out of our little hole that we're in in our offices, where you can't really see the forest through the trees because you're so close to it. It
Right.
helps people to have a bit more of a culture dynamic, I guess. And the other thing is that being able to have something that is set in place to better every part of your team. So I'm a huge student of communication. Communication is a big deal to me. And so I have taken multiple master courses on communication and how to basically use certain cues in your life to be able to influence people. And I think it's a powerful tool. Communicating, everything comes back down to communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal.
Absolutely.
And so to have a resource, something like that, to always be bettering your team. Let's have our leaders have a training that we can start refining our leadership skills. Let's have some of these things that may not always be taught at some of these events. Those are the resources that we have found very impactful for offices to be able to really make a difference.
There's so much in there, and I think communication is vital. If you've ever talked to me for any length of time, you know I'm obsessed with words and how we choose to describe things. Like when I was a consultant helping practices fix their processes, one of the first things I would do is adjust small language things. If I heard somebody call a prescription negative instead of minus, I would adjust that. Minor thing, right? Nobody wants to hear that their prescription is negative. Nobody wants to
Yes.
hear that about themselves. That's just not a good feeling. Things like trial contact lenses. People were not allowed to say trial contact lenses. They are diagnostic contact lenses because that's what they're for.
Yeah.
They're not free, they are prescriptive,
Yeah.
right? Like small communication things like that have such an impact on how everything else goes. And just setting that groundwork makes everything a little bit easier. I want to touch on the broader point of what you just said and would love if I misread it. So please correct me if I'm wrong. We had talked about how people get this idea that I'm going to change, I'm going to improve my capture rate. And they don't really have a sense of how. My read is they think that by measuring a thing or paying attention to a metric, that's going to influence the behavior instead of changing the behavior to influence the metric.
Yes, and I'm a firm believer of that which is tracked will grow, because giving it your mental attention and the energy and things like that. So it's not completely wrong in that direction, but you are correct in my assessment is that we need to go about changing the behavior at the ground level, and that change will have this building effect that will indeed change your capture rate. And what's really beautiful is that when you empower people to see the differences and changes that they're making on the ground level, they start thinking out of the box and coming up with their own solutions that they may have never even thought before,
Right.
just because it's, well, this worked, what if we try this, or this worked, oh yeah, that didn't work, okay, let's try something else. So it helps offices to step more into their creative being, to be able to have a little bit more
Mhm.
openness of what they can be doing to influence those higher numbers.
And I would also add that success begets more success,
That's right.
right? If you start measuring a thing and you see your number increase to your point, well, this worked. What if I did that? And then that happens with every new initiative or,
Hmm.
the things that you do want to influence in your practice. So, if you set a strong communication framework, a strong training framework, and understanding of what you're trying to influence and why, then the next step becomes easier. But if you're just flying by the seat of your pants and on everything, it's never going to get easier. You might succeed anyway, and that is whatever, but it won't be because you had a good process. It'll be
Right. When you go to
despite
try
not
and
having
repeat
a
it again
process.
or try and improve it again.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Hmm.
It's super interesting. So, okay, communication is key, measuring your success, empowering your team to understand what's happening and why. You want to introduce something new, maybe a new piece of diagnostic equipment, maybe a new type of exam, maybe a new high end frame line or a new lens category or something like that. How do you get a team who is new to this concept from being scared of the change to adopting the change to being the change?
Yeah, great question. Because now I'm just like, oh, we got this, and this. So,
Perfect.
how do we go about taking a team that is already doing a swell job and they're doing just great. And how do we go about introducing something new? Well, the first thing is that one of my favorite things to do is to go back to foundations. What are some foundational things that we are missing out on? And that's where I can take you down the communication road forever. Verbal cues, nonverbal cues, the cues that we're unintentionally sending our patients. So we
Yeah.
could go down that road. But then you also mentioned, what about bringing on like a new frame brand? Or what about bringing on new diagnostic equipment? I would say the framework for success there is to not just go, okay, guys, I bought this new diagnostic equipment at the show and it's going to be here Monday. And they'll give us a 30-minute rundown while we're eating our lunches and doing some patient care because we can't give them 100% of our attention. And then we're going to sell it. It's going
Who
to
has
be,
time?
yeah. So you can see all of the faults there, right? You have to have a framework basically that's setting up, okay, here's our customer success team that's coming with the diagnostic equipment. And, here are their resources. Here's what we're going to do, and then one of my biggest things is being able to practice talking about it. Everyone freaking hates doing role play stuff. They hate it. I get it. But it was actually, I was at a power practice event, the same one that we were at recently. And one of the doctors mentioned, my team doesn't want to do any role play with things, but they expect that because it's awkward, but they expect that it's going to be game time and they're going to go out there and they're going to hit the game winning shot. Even Michael Jordan didn't go do that. Michael Jordan was practicing
Right.
all the time. So there's this awkwardness when it comes to training. And so my reality that I like to impose upon offices is to say, okay, give me different scenarios. Let's write them down. So, okay, what if I have a patient who's just like, no, 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 how do I handle this objection? How do I present it to them? Okay, let's all write it down. Let's all write down how we're going to present this. Okay, now look at what you wrote down. I want you to change things around. Write it again. Write it the third time. Okay, now that everyone has theirs the third time, now let's go around and share, take up the pieces that we like. Okay, now let's go about doing it again. So it's a way of having a role play and creating a dialogue and a script that is more beneficial to being able to present things to the team that will then present it properly to the patients. So building that framework and that success to not only have, okay, here's the equipment, here's how you run it, here's how you sell it, here's how you talk with patients about it. A lot of that is often missed with like, okay, let's do our 30-minute success meeting. Like, no, that's not good enough.
Right.
So if it is something that you are indeed investing in, you also need to invest the time and training in order to allow for the success of that product. Now, when we come to frames, I am a big proponent of independent brands, but whether you have an independent or a licensed type brand, when you're bringing on a new brand, one of my biggest things is I always tell offices, don't ruin Christmas. What by that is in our family, we have Christmas morning. That's like our Santa morning or whatever. And that's like the usually a nice big gift. And we have the family, each contributes a gift or whatever the evening before, especially for the kids, right? Now, if we all had all of that, this is why I think about when people ruin Christmas morning because they have the gifts from everyone and the big Santa gift, and you ruin Christmas morning. Like now, there's too many exciting things. Like it's like a sugar crash. Where if you have it spread out, it allows for you to be able to learn about something and be excited about something and get other people excited about it, right? So, one of the things that I really encourage when it comes to bringing on a new brand is take the time to learn about the brand and then have each of your team members go out and choose what styles they know that they can sell, not the ones they want to wear, the ones that they know that they can sell.
Right.
And then, because I hate it when a frame buyer is like, hey, we brought on a new line. It's really cool. It's independent and it's all handmade. Here you go. When you bring on a new brand, you need to have the training of what makes that brand unique. And if you don't have if that brand doesn't have a unique story, licensed or not, don't waste your time. Right? Because
Right.
but the
Right.
reality is that being able to have that story to share, people love stories. We're all humans. Humans love stories. And they love being able to be like, oh yeah, this was made in this Italian guy's basement. And you can see the filigree that he puts on here. People have been wanting him to move into a big shop. And he's like, nope, I want to be able to work from my home. This is what I do. Like, that's a cool story. And you can see the artistry in what they create, right? Now, there are very different types of stories, and people love to be able to tell stories. But if you don't give your team the opportunity to learn those stories, it's not going to sell that well. Even
Absolutely. When you come in with a new frame line that has that kind of story, it makes it so much easier for you as the staff member or the practice to explain to the patient why they should care. A lot of patients, they've heard of Ray-Ban or they've heard of Oakley or whatever. They've heard of Prada. They've heard of these designer brands, and maybe they have some sense of what makes those things special to the extent that they are special, or they just like the brand and associate the status with that. But I think the point you made is super important. Humans as a species love stories.
Yes.
Goes back to the early days of humanity, the paintings on the cave walls and our oral histories and all that stuff. We live for story. So if you get a collection that you can't distinguish between what everything else that you carry, you didn't get a new collection. You got obstacles.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yes. I like that a lot. I'm stealing it.
Okay, fantastic. So it's an even exchange. Perfect.
Good. Love
Deal.
it. Yeah.
But I think it's so important that you, as the staff member, can tell that story. And there's a narrative to how the frame is manufactured or where the materials came from. And increasingly, people are interested. Like Tom's became huge because people wanted the comfortable shoes, but they also really like the idea of some social benefit that somebody somewhere was getting shoes and they like feeling good about their purchases or they like understanding what they're getting. And I think that is such a missing component of what we talk about that oddly enough applies to diagnostic equipment also, right? I
Hmm.
mean, diagnostic equipment doesn't have the custom dude in his
Sorry.
basement and the filigree,
Yeah.
but there is a narrative to why the diagnostic equipment matters to the patient. I think we don't do a good job of saying, even for something that's been around for as long as retinal images, right? We don't tell that story. The question is, do you want retinal photos?
Ah,
And the patient's got to go
ah.
like, maybe, I don't know, what are retinal photos? And that stinks. And from a patient's perspective, and the another thing that I wrote down that I think is really important that you said is the unintentional cues,
Mhm.
that there are things that you're doing that speak to your patient that tell them what they should and shouldn't do.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and verbal and nonverbal cues such as do you. Okay, do you to me is like saying the F word in the optical. You don't get to say that. It's stinking rude. Don't do it. And, I always tell the
Right.
story about, my son Connor when he was little. He's like 17 now. He's like 6'2". But when he was little, if I would say, Connor, do you want veggies with your burgers tonight? What's Connor going to say? No. But if I say, Connor, would you like to have carrots or peas with dinner tonight? He's going to choose carrots or peas. Saying do you or asking questions that require a yes or no answer are going to get you a ridiculous yes or no response. To say that we have very few moments with our patients when they're there in the office, and we need to maximize every stinking second. And the reality is that so many offices, during the handoff from doctor to optician, they're like, oh, how's your day today? Oh, it's good. All nonsense, complete nonsense. You can be talking about something so much more refined. I would much rather you ask that patient, hey patient, tell me a little bit about how clearly you were able to see back there in that phoropter. Was that pretty awesome? That gets them to reflect upon what was happening in the office, because I don't know why there's some sort of thing that when they walk out of an exam room, that threshold that's on the floor, when they walk past that, they get like exam amnesia. Like it's like they forget. Like
Right.
what
Right.
happened? Right? Where am I? And now they're just like, oh, I just don't want to pay any money. Like that's kind of like what ends up happening. But if you remind them and keep that conversation going as to the clarity that they had back in that exam room and start keeping the conversation there rather than like, oh yeah, the weather's nice outside. And these ridiculous nonsense questions get ridiculous nonsense answers that are completely pointless. That's
No, no, you're absolutely right, though. It's so important. The exam amnesia bit, it really resonates. Something that I've said for years now is that eyewear is eye care.
Mhm.
Though they're not different things. Patients have this assumption that, okay, I did the doctor bit and I want to avoid the sales bit. But it is incumbent on us to help our patients realize that the sales bit, the dispensary, is an extension of the eye care.
It's the
It is
manifestation of
eye
the eye care.
care.
Yes.
Exactly. It's the eye care made physical,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that bit is so lost. If you start the conversation with small talk, you'll have a small conversation. And I
That's right.
think that it's so important. Little things like how you ask the questions or how you structure a customer's potential choices has such an influence on what they end up with. An example that I like to draw on is anchoring. If the first frame I show a patient is $150 and the second frame I show them is $900, guess which one they're going to go with.
Yeah.
It really tells that story. Similarly, when you're intaking a contact lens patient, a pretty common question for a tech to ask is something like, are you happy with your contacts? And they'll say, yeah, they're fine, whatever. That doesn't get anybody anywhere. What if you asked instead, on a scale of 1 to 10, rank how comfortable your contacts
Yeah.
are? You know,
One thing I really like is if we could change anything about your contacts to make it even more perfect, what would it be? Because then they're not
yeah,
complaining, but they're also bringing up like, well, this one does feel like it moves all the time. It drives me insane. Awesome. I need
right.
to know
And they wouldn't
that.
give you that, they wouldn't volunteer that information when you ask how are their contacts. And it's not like patients are trying to keep information from you.
No,
They just don't
mine.
think of it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
And changing how you ask changes the answers you get.
Hmm.
So important. As a practice owner or practice manager, how do you identify when a gap is big enough to warrant dedicated training? If you want to make the handoff better, how do you know when the handoff is so bad that it needs dedicated time? And how do you make that time?
Great. I like it because
Absolutely.
the reality is we don't know what we don't know. And so many offices will go through their everyday life going, well, this is the way we've always done it. The reality is that you won't be able to see what the result could be unless you try it. And this is one thing that drives me crazy with our industry is, let's better our handoff. The doctor needs to be prescribing from the chair. The optician needs to be talking about multiple pair the whole time and these types of things. What does that actually look like? And we don't know what we don't know. To see when the handoff is lacking, you have to go out and search for something. That's what I train is you go out and you search for something and you go, oh my gosh, we can totally be doing that. We're not doing that. Let's try it. The awareness is the key of it all. Once you know that there are different opportunities out there, because if I go up to an office, there was one that we were in almost a year ago now. They're like, okay, we don't need to talk about our handoff. We got our handoff nailed. Awesome. So we did our trainings. We focused on other things in their office. This was when I met with leadership the first day. So then the end of the second day, we usually like to do very hands-on training so that they can see how I speak to patients. And then I can see kind of how they interact with patients as well. And the handoff was freaking terrible. Like it was so
Right.
bad. Not, the verbal and nonverbal cues that were being relayed were horrendous. And I was like, okay, we're going to reconvene. So after that next set of patients, I pulled back the doctors and I'm like, listen, I know y'all think your handoff is great. I'm going to show you what a handoff could look like and how you can be handing off the level of expertise from yourself to the optician so that the patient goes, wow, these opticians are great. I need them. So you need to be doing that. And then secondly, your opticians are super lacking on your verbal and nonverbal cues. They're giving cues that they're not interested. They're giving cues that they're annoyed, that they're bored. I've been working with them for the last 2 days. It's not intentional, but that's what they're giving the cues of. And so we have to fix this. And then beyond that, we need to have the conversation of having the multiple pairs throughout the whole patient experience out in the optical gallery. That was one of the really big things where they didn't know, they literally said, our handoffs are great. Mm,
Of course.
I would consider myself a great communicator, but
I would.
I'm signed up for another master course. And I think it's one of those things where if you think you're good, you ain't good enough. But if you're not growing, you're dying, in my opinion. And so, why not always be looking for other opportunities to streamline something or to improve something or to refine something even more? So, yeah, we can go down a whole rabbit hole of handoffs. It's awesome. Best practices for handoffs. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll invite you back for that one.
Okay, deal.
Kayla, thank you so much. So let me recap some of what I've learned today and let me know what my notes are missing. So, best practices for ongoing training. First, communication is key, whether intentional or unintentional, verbal, nonverbal. The way you communicate with your team and the way they communicate then with your customers has a huge impact on your success now, in the midterm, in the long term. When you're doing any kind of training, make sure it's structured. Trying to just put out fires while training somebody is a recipe for not really doing either.
Yes.
If you think there's something that needs to be improved, listen, pay attention, take notes, understand what's missing, and then devote the time that's needed once you can clearly identify what you want to impact. Because it's easy enough to say, I want to be better, but that doesn't mean anything unless you can drill down and get more specific. To that end, measure and be practical. KPIs are great, but you can't just say, I'm going to make my multiple pair number go up. Everybody's responsible for a certain component of that. What are you going to practically fix? You can't just say, I'm going to make a number better and hope that it gets
Right,
better.
right. And drill down
You
on that just
use
a
the
little bit
tools
more,
that,
if you don't mind.
sure, yeah, yeah.
Because I had said you need the very specific things down here, and I feel like I didn't get specific enough for your listeners. So what I would say is to go even further. We need more multiple pair sales. Okay, well, what does that look like? Well, typically we sell five multiple, maybe it's really bad. We sell five multiple pair a month. So at five multiple pair a month, we've got three opticians, and that's pretty much two, what, 175 or ish. So okay, so we're all at about two. Let's, for this next month, let's all go to three. Now, what is some of the conversations that we're going to have with patients? You can come up with different scripts, and you can take the time during your office meetings to build these scripts so that each person kind of has their own voice in their script, but it's being refined. How are we going to bring this up to patients? How are we going to keep this top of mind during their experience out in the optical gallery? How are we going to track it? How are we going to achieve this? Who's got what responsibility? Okay, so this is where we're all at. Everyone agree? We're going to go from two to three. Let's see who gets it. So that's the opportunity to be able to drill it down. What does that look like? Or maybe you go, okay, we're going to do multiple pair sales. We're going to focus specifically on sunglasses because now is the time. We need the sunglasses. What does this look like with sunglasses? What are our best sunglass brands out there? What are the brands that if we put it on the patient's face, they go, whoa, look at how clear that is. You know, being able to have solutions for your team to point out because they just might not be thinking of it because they're thinking about, you know, their kid's soccer game later. So give them the tools that they can just go implement. Yeah, there we go. Now I'm happy with
Thank you for no, no, yeah,
it.
thank you for drilling in a deeper, because it did actually remind me of a thing that I missed that you did say kind of all throughout. For ongoing training best practices, seek individual commitment.
Yes.
So it's easy to say, like, as a practice we're going to do this, but if you don't get the individual contributors to say, I'm going to do this, then the bigger thing can't happen.
Yeah. Like, why didn't we reach our multiple pair number? Oh, I was just doing what I
Out
knew.
of my hands,
What I
what could I have
normally
done?
do. What I normally do is not okay. And so we all know what we normally do. Let's raise that standard. I love it.
Kayla, thank you so much for sharing all of this. Thank you guys for listening to Best Practices. Any final pearls of wisdom before we wrap up?
This
And
is
how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, this is really fabulous. Anybody who wants to know more about Spexy and what Spexy has and our different offerings, you can go to our website. It's bspexy.com, BESPEXY, bspexy.com, or you can just Google us. We have a very unique name, which is great. And yeah, I think that this was really fabulous. I appreciate you having me on here because our conversations always go in such beautiful directions. And I love that I become more enlightened and kind of validated in my journey when I talk with you because you're like, yes, you understand the needs of independent practices. So thank you.
Thank you, Kayla.